Tonight we're discussing the latest trade talk around the Detroit Red Wings and the Edmonton Oilers. Plus we have an NHL trade that was completed earlier between the Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues. The NHL has adjusted its COVID protocols, and we have an update on the cancelled World Junior Championships as well. All that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we've already been NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. Let's kick things off with the trade that was announced a few hours ago between the Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues. Now, this is not a major trade of any sort. It's a very minor deal. Both players are minor leaguers, both basically prospects that are not really worked out with their existing franchises and are getting a fresh start. The St. Louis Blues are trading center prospect Nolan to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for center and wing prospect Will Bitten. Spent a fair bit of time in the American Hockey League so far. Right now, Nolan is 25, was a fifth-round pick back in 2016. He played 4 years of college hockey at Northeastern and has played in the American Hockey League ever since, trying to find his way to the NHL. So he's got about 3 years of a minor league experience now at this point. And in the case of Will Bitten, he was actually originally drafted the same draft year in 2016. He was a much higher pick in the third round by the Montreal Canadiens, and he was traded to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for Gustav Olofsson. So he's already been traded once. This is the second trade in his career here, where he's played just over 3 years in the American Hockey League as well. Bitten was probably drafted with a little bit more of a higher expectation around him than Stevens was, but given the fact that at this point he hasn't played any NHL games, basically a shot for both these guys to go to a new team and see if they can find an opportunity. At this point, both players likely report to the American Hockey League teams, and certainly not a given that either will go to the NHL, but I guess they get a fresh start with these new franchises. Now, as I mentioned as well, we also had some updates today announced by the NHL when it comes to their COVID protocols. Now, the NHL is reducing the isolation time frame after a positive test, assuming that they're asymptomatic. Right now in the U.S., the CDC has announced they're recommending a 5-day quarantine period at this point. I guess their recommendation kind of indicates that the 1 or 2 days prior to the onset of symptoms or a positive test are generally the time that you're the most likely to transmit, and then the 2 to 3 days afterwards. So that 5-day window is what they feel is the most dangerous time for you to be out around other people to pass along the virus. So that's kind of the reasoning and rationale behind the 5 days. So the NHL, like some of the other professional sports league, is adapting this policy. The only issue here, of course, is that it's not a given that all teams are going to have access to this, because at the end of the day, it's the local health authorities where the players test positive will determine what the rules they have to follow. I mean, the rules are different throughout Canada, throughout the United States. Every jurisdiction has their own local health authorities, whether it's in different provinces or different states. So to me, as much as this is sort of a good thing in a way for players that are not symptomatic to be able to return sooner, I'm a little bit surprised we've seen the NHL adopt the rule, given the fact that it certainly has the possibility of creating a competitive disadvantage. So depending on where teams are located will determine obviously what their quarantine period is. And it's, like I said, it's good in a way, but, you might have some players in quarantine for 10 to 14 days, and other times it's 5 days, and that's a major substantial difference. So we'll see, obviously, as time goes on, with the CDC making this a recommendation. I would assume over time, most U.S. locations will adopt this policy. I really don't have a list right now in front of me of what places are already adopting. This is pretty new. This is only something that's come out here in the last, I believe, 24 to 48 hours. So I'm not sure exactly where all in the U.S. as making this their policy. I know in Canada it's not a policy anywhere as of yet, but Public Health Agency of Canada and all the Canadian health authorities, to me, I mean, I'm Canadian, I live here, I can speak from firsthand knowledge. We are always slower at adapting these things, so I'm not sure if or when we'll see the Canadian at the federal level recommend it, so that the different provincial authorities will adjust their policies or not. But it's certainly, like I said, it's good in a way, but it's going to create a competitive disadvantage for the teams that can access it because of the rules where they are located. Now, of course, we saw the news earlier today, and if you missed it, there is a video on the channel. I'll link it in the YouTube cards. We had some more positive tests announced today at the 2022 IIHF World Junior Championships in Alberta between Edmonton and Red Deer, and the tournament was effectively canceled from this point forward. So at this point, it's a very sad day for a lot of those players. Many of those players may not get another opportunity to compete in the tournament, and for many of them, it's usually the highlight of their career, the fact that they made it, strong enough performance to represent their country at this level. There's not a huge amount of percentage-wise for players that go on to play in the NHL and then from there be stars or represent their country at the World Championships or the Olympics and all those other types of events that are potential down the road. So it's really sad, really unfortunate. There is hope, though, that the tournament might be rescheduled. There was word from TSN just a short time ago saying that the IIHF is exploring the possibility of taking another stab at hosting this tournament along with the U18 women's that were obviously effectively canceled. Many of the January tournaments were postponed, but the U18 women's were canceled, which created certainly a big outrage as to why it was canceled and not have more of an effort to reschedule it. But at this point, maybe they can put on an event for both of these teams or both these age groups to have an early summer tournament. I mean, based on the calendar of events and based on what's likely going to transpire here over the coming months with this latest wave of Omicron variant, summertime generally is a lot safer. It has been the past couple of years. You get a lot more people being outdoors more. People aren't cooped up inside as much. In summers, at least we're in Canada, at least we can say that it's been much better. So perhaps we can have a take two here, and this tournament can be held along with the U18 women's possibly in June. No guarantees, but it seems at least they are open and willing to make another attempt. I'm not sure if it'll be in the same location or where it'll be, but it may not be the end here for some of these places. But as I mentioned in another video, it seems like the reports we're getting, and we're waiting to confirm a lot of this information, but it does seem like it was a poorly run tournament when it comes to the protocols and the looseness of players being able to be so accessible to the public. I know the one staying in Red Deer in Group B, many of them said that there was a hotel where some of the teams were staying, and there was a big wedding going on there, and there was it's rumored that the wedding might have been the ones who transmitted towards the players. I don't know, but this is all just hearsay right now. We'll probably get more in the coming days. We may not ever confirm if that indeed is true or not. Obviously, these players had arrived well ahead of the tournament to go through the testing, to make sure they had lots of time, to go through any quarantine periods and all that. And, after all that carefulness, something happened. But to me, the carefulness stopped when the tournament started. I was surprised to hear that these players were bunked up with each other. There was 2 players to a room, which I find really surprising given the age we live in right now with COVID. That was a recipe for disaster. And then on top of that, mixing the public in at the same hotels. Like, they should have had the entire hotel blocked off for the tournament so that they were not intermingling a lot. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And to me, that's a big part of the reason why many teams we've heard comments from a variety of teams in this tournament saying that it wasn't as much of a COVID issue as it was a poorly run tournament issue. So to me, it's a bad look for the IIHF. So they really need to make every effort to make sure this tournament does take place again at another time so that they can hopefully get everybody that they deserve to play here an opportunity to shine at the biggest stage, and might be, like I said, for a lot of them, the biggest stage you'll ever step foot on. Now, as I mentioned as well, some other news. One big item here for the Oilers. They're finally getting goaltender Mike Smith back. He's coming off long-term injury reserve today. So obviously the Oilers had to make a few roster moves, demoting a few players down to make the necessary space to get him there. So of course, with Smith's return, of course, there's a lot of questions about Mikko Koskinen. I know we're going to talk a little bit about some Oilers trade talk here, and some of the names mentioned here in a recent article talking about some Oilers moves. Koskinen again is mentioned. attention with the return of Mike Smith. The article was actually from a couple days ago, talking about the fact that if Smith can come back and play well, which we don't know yet. I mean, at this point, he's just activated. We need to see Mike Smith play. If he can play at the high level that he has in the past, if he can stay healthy, then that's going to create an opportunity here where Koskinen and a guy like maybe even Kailer Yamamoto might be your most likely players from the Oilers that we could see moved to make some deadline additions here. Of course, the Oilers right now are a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde team this year. Had a real solid start, but then we saw a different team here in stretches, and there's lots of hockey left. But there are times that we really don't know what team the Edmonton Oilers are and just how strong they're going to be. I would imagine Ken Holland recognizes, though, this being a real good opportunity year for them, and will look to add at the deadline if they remain in the type of position that we've seen them at earlier in the season. At some points, they were in first place. Of course, they've slipped down, obviously with the recent skid that they've been on, and obviously not having a bit of a hot and cold time here more lately. But still, the Oilers are a team that should definitely be in the playoffs and will make some additions. So there was a lot of talk about Koskinen being moved before. He had to kind of run with the ball there for a while when Smith was injured, and I think, to me, towards the tail end of it, the last couple of weeks, he was definitely part of the reason why the Oilers weren't as consistent. It's proven time and time again that he can't hold a heavy workload for an extended period of time. He's in the final year of that contract finally. There's definitely teams out there that need goaltending, and for some teams he would be an upgrade. So I can't help but wonder, based on what we've read here, that he could very well be a candidate to be moved out. But of course they're going to have to consider bringing in another goalie or run with Stuart Skinner. I'm not sure which way they go in that direction, but certainly some tough questions they have to decide. And a player like Kailer Yamamoto is another name that's been mentioned here that might be used as trade bait in order to make some upgrades here for the Oilers. I mean, that third line center spot still a bit in question, and the wing depth of Yamamoto's not playing up to his full capabilities. I mean, we're not that far removed from a time where he was playing a lot on the second line in the top six, putting up almost a point per game. But ever since then, like between last season and this one, he's not as consistent as he was, and things just are not going well. I mean, could we see Yamamoto swapped for a player that also needs a fresh start as well? Like, for example, Jake DeBrusk in Boston has been linked to the Oilers a lot, of course. His dad, Louis DeBrusk, broadcasts a lot of the Oilers games. Alberta is home for them. So you can't help but wonder if maybe that might be a possibility. Of course, I'm not sure that would be a one-for-one trade. I think Jake DeBrusk is certainly a little bit more established than Yamamoto, but Yamamoto's a young player with a lot of upside that the Bruins might be interested in as a potential replacement for DeBrusk if they're going to make that move. Like I said, it may not be exactly and there's no linkage that those teams are necessarily talking. That's just me suggesting that based on both players being mentioned now in the rumor mill, that could they be a fit for a swap. The Bruins have made it known that they want another younger player in return of similar value. And of course, Yamamoto's also young with a lot of potential upside. Could probably benefit from a fresh start as well, given his recent struggles. So that might be a fit. Like I said, it may not be one for one, but it might be something we could see. And there's also another article I read through recently looking at some options for the Detroit Red Wings. And of course, the Red Wings are a tough team to read right now, given the fact that they actually had a decent start and are really not totally out of the realm of the possibility of making the playoffs this year, even though a lot of people probably didn't predict them to improve that much to get into that kind of a spot this year. But if you look around all the odds makers out there, they still heavily put the odds against Detroit in making the playoffs here for the long haul. So some of the names on that team that are pending unrestricted free agents that you can't help but wonder would be, easy deadline moves for Yzerman to continue accumulating, draft and prospect currency here would be Nick Leddy, who's in the final year of his contract. You've got a guy like Vladislav Nemestikov and Thomas Greiss, all three of those players in final years of their deals, and I would think there's a pretty good possibility we might not see any of them return. I mean, Greiss is a possibility to re-sign, I suppose, but I would think Leddy and Nemestikov most likely do not. And the Red Wings are also mentioned in the article here as well that I read on the Red Wings rumors that they could even be interested in a guy like Jake DeBrusk. It would make a lot of sense. We've seen Yzerman go after other young players that were kind of a little bit of a project and needed a fresh start, like Robbie Fabry, for example, a prime example there. Could he do the same thing and kind of make Jake DeBrusk that next project? Now, of course, third division rivals. a little bit less likely to see a trade, but it's a situation where Detroit has a lot of young and interesting players that the Boston Bruins might find intriguing enough to do a swap, like a one-for-one type of deal. Hard to say exactly who that would be off the roster. I don't know if any of the young players, per se, that they would be willing to move, but I kind of wonder a little bit about Tyler Bertuzzi. I mean, Bertuzzi's played well for them, but of course we know he's missed time this year because of COVID and because of the fact that he can't travel into Canada in different jurisdictions because of his vaccination status. He's the only NHL player who's not fully vaccinated. And you can't help but wonder if it might be a point of contention with his team, and would they consider trying to trade him for a player that they can rely on to be in their game in, game out and not have those limitations. Now, of course, those same limitations would apply to Boston, and is that something that they would be interested in? I mean, the player himself is a great player and contributing at a good level, and you would think that Detroit would be interested in keeping him, and at the same time, the Bruins might be interested in acquiring him, but that status could complicate things as well, and it's just really hard to say. But even like a DeBrusk for Bertuzzi trade, another potential, swap of younger forwards, that just might make sense for both teams as well. You can't help but wonder. We saw Yzerman trade Anthony Mantha about a year ago, and that's something that we didn't really see coming as well. And if you look at where the Detroit rebuild is going, even though guys like Larkin and Mantha and Bertuzzi at one point not long ago were considered the core of this team, by the time this team is ready to contend, they're going to be getting on to their later 20s and getting a little bit older, and it might make sense to get what you can for them before they start getting too old, and kind of move them along here if they're not going to be part of that longer term solution. Like we didn't see the Mantha thing coming, but at least a lot of us didn't. But brought back Verana, who's been a pretty decent addition so far. Obviously out of the lineup here right now, but still, could we see a similar type of move when it comes to Bertuzzi? I can't help but wonder if it's a possibility, but I also wonder if that vaccination status might be a deterrent for any team to make that acquisition. If the Bruins picked him up and then they end up playing a Canadian team in the playoffs or something, that could be problematic where he wouldn't be able to play for a few of those games. So we'll see where this goes. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.